8 months ago, my sister poured scalding water over her own arm on my parents' porch and screamed that I had attacked her. By sunrise, I understood that the burn was never meant to punish me. It was meant to help her take my 7-year-old son. Before I take you back to that night, I hope you are doing well. Stay with me, because what our neighbor's camera revealed changed everything. And please subscribe to the channel for more family stories like this one. It happened at the end of November, when Minnesota received the kind of early snowstorm that made the afternoon look like midnight. The wind cut through the seams of my coat as I crossed my parents' driveway. Snow scraped over the pavement in white sheets. I had gone there to collect my son, Caleb. His school had dismissed the children early, but I had been trapped in a final cost meeting at the construction company where I worked. My parents had agreed to keep him briefly. When I stepped into their living room, Caleb was curled beneath a knitted blanket on the sofa, his face flushed and his blonde hair damp against his forehead. I pressed the back of my fingers to his skin. Heat pulsed from him. "Hey, buddy, how long have you felt this warm?" "Since after lunch," he murmured. A red wool glove lay beside his backpack. The matching glove was still on one hand because he had fallen asleep before taking it off. I removed it gently, checked his temperature with the thermometer from his bag, and frowned at the reading. The fever was not dangerously high, but it was climbing. "I'm taking him home," I said. "He needs fluids, medicine, and his own bed." My mother, Nancy, stood near the fireplace with her arms folded. "You should have been here when the school called." I came as soon as I could. Dad was already listed as the emergency contact. That is the problem, Lauren. Everyone else keeps rearranging their life around your schedule. I had heard versions of that sentence since my husband died 3 years earlier. Whatever I chose, my mother found a way to call it wrong. I zipped Caleb's backpack and kept my voice level. "This is one of the last times you will need to cover an early dismissal. His new after-school program starts next week. They also handle emergency release days." The room changed before anyone spoke. My father, Paul, stopped pretending to study the snow through the window. My mother lowered her arms. Then my sister Brooke walked in from the kitchen carrying a ceramic mug. "What new program?" she asked. Brooke was 34 and worked from home in freelance communications. After my husband died, she had helped with Caleb more than once. At first, I had been grateful. She took him to parks and helped him through the worst nights of his grief. The problem was that help had gradually become entitlement. She had started taking him places without telling me and letting strangers assume she was his mother. When Caleb repeated that he would not need after-school care if he lived with her, Brooke called it a joke. "I told Mom about the program last week," I said. "I am also updating the school pickup list. From now on, no one takes Caleb anywhere unless I approve it first." Brooke set the mug on the edge of the kitchen counter. "You are removing me from his life because I spend more time with him than you do. I am setting a boundary because you ignored the last one. He needs someone who is actually there. He has me. He has your calendar." Caleb shifted beneath the blanket. I saw his eyes open slightly, and I refused to continue the argument in front of him. "We are leaving," I said. "Tomorrow, I want the spare car key and the school pickup card returned." My mother stepped between us. "Your sister loves that child. You have always been stronger than she is, Lauren. Do not make this bigger than it needs to be." That sentence had controlled half my childhood. I was always expected to yield because I was stronger, but I was no longer a child asking permission to protect my son. "Being stronger does not mean letting people cross my boundaries," I said. "It means enforcing them." Brooke picked up her mug again. Her face softened so quickly that the change almost worked. "Can we talk outside?" she asked. I do not want Caleb hearing this. I should have refused. The porch gave her distance from the people inside and a clear stage outside. At the time, I thought she was finally showing enough judgment to move the argument away from my sick child. I followed her through the side door. The wind struck my cheeks hard enough to make my eyes water. Snow spun beneath the porch light. Brooke pulled the door nearly closed behind us but left it unlatched. Steam rose from her mug. "You are punishing me because Caleb loves me," she said. "No, I am stopping you from acting like his mother." Her jaw tightened. "I was the one who made him laugh after Daniel died. You were barely functioning. You helped him, and I thanked you. That did not transfer motherhood to you. You rush him through breakfast, leave him with other people, and come home exhausted. I can give him stability. You can be his aunt, or you can have no access at all. Those are the choices." Brooke stared at me for several seconds. There was no panic in her expression. She looked almost disappointed, as though I had missed a line she expected. Then she shifted the mug into her left hand. Her right hand moved under it. She tilted the rim toward her own forearm. The water spread across her sleeve and skin in a shining sheet. Brooke gasped, dropped the mug, and stepped backward. Ceramic struck the porch boards and cracked. "She attacked me!" Brooke screamed. "Lauren burned me!" I had not touched her. My hands were still at my sides. The side door opened almost immediately. My mother stood in the doorway, with my father directly behind her. Brooke clutched her arm and began crying with a speed that made the scene feel rehearsed. "What did you do?" my mother demanded. "Nothing." She poured it on herself. "I saw her come at me," Brooke cried. She lost control because I told her the truth about Caleb. I looked at my father. "Paul, get my coat, my phone, Caleb's medicine, and my keys. We are leaving." Before he could move, Caleb appeared behind them. He had wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and pushed past my mother's hip. "Mom?" He ran onto the porch in socks, still holding one red glove. I caught him against me and felt the fever through his pajamas. "Caleb, go inside," Nancy ordered. He tightened both arms around my waist. "No, he is sick," I said. "Give me his coat and medicine now." My mother looked at Brooke's wet sleeve, then at me. The choice she made took less than a second. "If he wants to go with you, take him. You are both done here." She shoved Caleb's backpack onto the porch. It struck the boards and tipped over. The loose red glove slid beneath the railing. "My keys and phone are inside," I said. "So is his coat." Nancy pulled the door closed. I moved forward, but the deadbolt snapped into place with a hard, metallic click. The sound was louder than Brooke's scream. Through the narrow glass panel, I saw Paul standing behind my mother. His hand was still near the lock. Brooke stood several feet away, holding her arm. She looked directly at Caleb as he began to shake beneath the blanket. She could have opened the door. She could have told them the lie had gone far enough. She did neither. I removed my coat and wrapped it around Caleb over the blanket. The cold bit through my blouse immediately. I banged once on the door, not to beg, but to make my demand unmistakable. "Open this door and return my phone, keys, his coat, and his medicine. I am documenting that you are refusing to give them to me." No one answered. Caleb's teeth started chattering. I picked up his backpack, kept one arm around him, and looked across the driveway. Joanne Mercer, the quiet woman who lived next door, was standing behind her front window. Her porch light came on. "We are going there," I told Caleb. "Stay under my coat and hold on to me." The distance between the houses was less than 50 yards, but the wind turned it into a wall. Snow filled my shoes. Caleb stumbled once, and I lifted him against my hip even though he was too old and too heavy to carry comfortably. Joanne opened her door before we reached the steps. "Get inside," she said. I already called 911. Warm air closed around us. Joanne wrapped Caleb in dry blankets and placed a towel beneath his feet. She brought water and waited beside us until the emergency medical technicians arrived. He had no severe hypothermia, but his fever and the exposure concerned them. One technician asked how long he had been outside. "Between 5 and 8 minutes," I said. "He came out on his own. My mother closed the door, my father locked it, and they kept his coat, medication, my phone, and my car keys inside." I gave the officer the same facts and asked that Caleb's clothing, the weather, and the withheld items be included in the report. Across the street, blue light reflected off my parents' windows. Brooke was already speaking to another officer with a towel wrapped around her arm. Joanne watched her for a moment, then looked at me. "My camera may have caught the porch," she said. I did not touch Joanne's phone or ask her to send me anything. She opened the security application herself while the officer stood nearby. The video began with Brooke and me stepping outside. The wind distorted the sound, but the picture was clear. Brooke held the mug. I stood several feet away. She shifted it into her left hand, placed her right arm beneath it, and poured. On the screen, I stepped backward before the mug even hit the boards. No one spoke for several seconds. Joanne replayed the moment once, then paused it. You never touched her. No, I said. I did not. She glanced toward the officer. There is something else. I do not know if it matters, but this is not the first time something over there felt wrong. Joanne opened an older recording from 3 weeks earlier. My car was parked near my parents' side driveway. The image showed my father approaching it with the spare key I had left for emergencies. He unlocked the trunk, looked toward the house, and stepped aside. Brooke appeared carrying a dark shopping bag. She placed it inside my trunk, closed the lid, and handed the key back to Paul. Joanne froze the image on Brooke's hand leaving the trunk. I do not know what was in that bag, she said. But she put it there 3 weeks ago, while you were inside. That was the moment I understood the attack had not begun on the porch. Joanne kept the video paused while the officer wrote down the date and time displayed on the screen. I wanted to watch the older recording again, but Caleb had started coughing beneath the blankets, and his face looked brighter with fever than it had at my parents' house. The paramedic repeated his temperature and told me the cold exposure had been brief enough that he showed no signs of serious hypothermia. That did not make what happened harmless. Caleb had been outside in socks, without his coat or medicine, while already sick. I gave the officer my email address and asked him to document that my parents had kept my phone, keys, and Caleb's belongings inside after locking the door. I did not call it kidnapping or child endangerment. I described exactly what had happened and let the people taking the report decide how to classify it. Joanne agreed to preserve every recording from that evening and the older clip involving my car. The officer asked her not to edit or send the original files until he explained how they should be exported. She nodded and wrote his instructions on the back of an envelope. Brooke had already told the other officer that I had thrown the contents of the mug at her, grabbed Caleb, and stormed into the snow before anyone could stop me. My parents had supported her version. The video showed the opposite, but the police still had to record every statement. I understood that. What I did not yet understand was why 3 people who had watched Caleb run onto the porch were willing to claim I had dragged him there. The urgent care clinic was less than 10 minutes away, but the roads made the drive feel longer. An officer returned my phone, keys, coat, and Caleb's medicine after retrieving them from my parents' house. My mother had placed everything inside a grocery bag, as if she were returning items from a store. She also sent a message before I reached the clinic. Bring Caleb back when you calm down. We can resolve this privately. Brooke sent 4 messages. The first said she could not believe I had attacked her. The second said Caleb had witnessed everything. The third warned that she would do whatever was necessary to protect him. The last message was different. You should think carefully before making this worse. I took screenshots, saved them to a folder, and did not respond. At urgent care, a nurse examined Caleb's hands and feet while I answered questions. His toes were cold, but his circulation was normal. His fever had climbed, and the doctor believed he had a routine viral infection that needed rest, fluids, and monitoring. When the doctor asked how he had ended up outside without a coat, I told the story once, slowly. My mother closed the door, I said. My father locked it. My son's coat, medicine, and my phone were still inside. My sister was standing there. None of them opened the door. The doctor stopped typing for a moment. How long was he outside? Between 5 and 8 minutes. Our neighbor let us in and called for help. Did anyone prevent you from taking him somewhere warm? They refused to open the door. I went to the neighbor as soon as I realized they were not changing their minds. I asked her to record the facts without describing Caleb as severely injured. He had been frightened and exposed to unnecessary risk, but I did not want an exaggerated medical record that could later be attacked as dishonest. The doctor explained that the clinic had an obligation to report concerns when a child might have been placed in danger by caregivers. I gave her the police incident number and the officer's name. That was the first official report about my family that came from someone other than them. My insurance covered most of the visit, but I still paid the copay and part of the deductible from my health savings account. The amount was not financially devastating, yet I remember staring at the receipt and understanding that the night would keep costing me long after the snow melted. Caleb fell asleep during the drive home. I carried him inside, put him in my bed, and sat beside him until his breathing settled. My parents continued calling. Brooke left a voicemail in which she cried for almost a minute before saying anything. I love Caleb, she said. I will not apologize for protecting him from you. I saved the voicemail with the messages and turned off notifications. The next morning, Joanne called to say the officer had helped her export the original recordings. She kept the camera system and memory storage untouched. She also created a working copy for herself and another for law enforcement. I contacted a family law attorney named Naomi Keller. My husband and I had once used her office for estate documents after Caleb was born. I remembered her because she explained complicated things without making me feel foolish. Naomi listened without interrupting while I described the porch, the video, and the older recording of Brooke putting a bag in my car. Do not confront them about what else the camera recorded, she said. Do not post the video. Do not ask Caleb detailed questions about what he heard or saw. Save every message and communicate only in writing. I already removed them from his school pickup list. That was the right decision. Ask the school to preserve all pickup records and messages involving your parents or sister. She quoted a retainer that made me sit back in my chair. After Daniel died, I had built an emergency fund because I never wanted fear to force me into asking my parents for money. I transferred the retainer that morning. The kitchen renovation I had planned for spring would have to wait. Protecting Caleb could not. Naomi also contacted the police officer about examining my car without contaminating anything that might matter. That afternoon, I met the officer in the secured parking area behind his station. The clip from Joanne's camera showed Brooke placing a dark shopping bag in my trunk 3 weeks earlier. I had not noticed it because she had pushed it into the recessed cargo compartment behind my winter emergency supplies. Paul had been standing beside her with my spare key. The officer photographed the trunk before touching anything. He wore gloves and removed the bag while I watched. Inside were empty liquor bottles. There were several different brands, including whiskey, vodka, and rum. I did not recognize any of them. I rarely drank, and when I did, it was usually a glass of wine at dinner with friends. There was no reason for a collection of empty bottles to be hidden in my car. Then I remembered a phone call from several weeks earlier. A woman from the county had asked whether I ever drank while caring for Caleb. She had also asked whether I had driven him after consuming alcohol. At the time, she had not told me who made the report. I had answered honestly, provided the name of Caleb's pediatrician, and assumed someone had confused me with another parent. The bottles changed that memory. They wanted someone to find these, I said. Naomi, who had joined by phone, stopped me before I went further. We can suspect that, she said. For now, we can prove your sister placed a bag in the vehicle and that the bag contained empty bottles when the officer recovered it. Let the evidence establish the rest. Her correction mattered. Anger made me want to leap from the bottles to the entire plan. Naomi kept pulling me back to what could be demonstrated. That evening, a county child protection worker called. Her name was Marisol Vega, and her voice was calm rather than accusing. She explained that the county now had 2 separate reasons to contact me. The urgent care clinic had reported Caleb's exposure to the storm. The agency also had prior reports expressing concern about my parenting. Prior reports? I asked. Marisol could not identify the reporters, but she summarized the allegations. Someone had claimed I occasionally left Caleb without proper supervision. Another report suggested I abused alcohol and drove with him. A third described me as emotionally unstable and said Caleb was afraid to return home after spending time with relatives. For several seconds, the words felt disconnected from my life. Caleb had an after-school caregiver, a documented pickup schedule, regular medical appointments, and teachers who saw him every weekday. I had records for all of it. I can provide the care schedules and school attendance, I said. I can also give you contact information for his caregiver and pediatrician. That would be helpful, Marisol said. I also need to assess the incident at your parents' home and speak with the adults who were present. Are you planning to remove Caleb from me? No decision like that has been made. He is currently with you, receiving medical care, and there is no indication of an immediate threat in your home. We still have to review the allegations and determine what happened at your parents' house. Her answer was careful, but it allowed me to breathe. I gave her Naomi's contact information and agreed to cooperate. I also told her that Caleb had been through enough and asked that any interview be conducted by someone trained to speak with children. After the call, I gathered his school attendance, medical records, after-school invoices, and my work calendar. The coldness of the documents steadied me. Each page contradicted a version of me that my family had been building without my knowledge. Later, I found Caleb awake on the sofa. His fever had come down, and he was watching snow collect against the window. "Mom?" he asked. "I'm right here. Do I have to stay with Aunt Brooke until you get better?" I sat beside him. "Why would you have to do that?" He pulled the blanket over his knees. "She said sometimes moms get too tired, and kids need a safer house for a while." "When did she tell you that?" Caleb's shoulders tightened. I saw the change and stopped myself before asking another question. "You do not have to explain anything right now," I said. "You are staying with me. The adults will handle the adult problems." He stared at the blanket. "Aunt Brooke said it was a safety game." I kept my voice gentle. "What kind of game?" She asked questions, like who stays with me when you work, and if I get sad when you leave. I wanted every detail, but wanting it did not mean I had the right to pull it from him while he was frightened. Naomi had warned me that repeated questioning could confuse him, increase his guilt, and damage the usefulness of anything he later said to a trained professional. I touched the edge of the blanket instead of reaching for my phone. "You are not in trouble," I said. "Nothing you said can make me stop being your mother." His eyes filled, but he did not cry. He leaned against my side and rested his head beneath my chin. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Caleb whispered the sentence that showed me how long Brooke had been preparing him. "Aunt Brooke said the game only works if Mommy doesn't know the answers." The morning after Caleb told me about the safety game, I called Naomi before I called anyone else. I wanted to ask my son every question that had been circling in my head. How long had Brooke been talking to him this way? What had he told her? Where had she taken him? Had my mother been present? Had my father heard any of it? Naomi stopped me before urgency turned into another form of pressure on Caleb. "Do not question him again," she said. "You can reassure him. You can listen if he volunteers something. But let a trained professional handle the interview. I am his mother. I should know what someone has been saying to him." "You should know," Naomi replied. "But he should not have to earn safety by giving you the right answers." That sentence stayed with me. My entire career was built around finding missing information. When a construction estimate was wrong, I traced labor hours, supplier quotes, and material quantities until the error appeared. I had always believed that the smartest person in a crisis was the one who asked the most precise questions. That week, being smart meant sitting outside a closed office and asking none. The child specialist's waiting room had pale walls, soft chairs, and a wooden shelf filled with puzzles. Caleb chose a toy truck and rolled it across his knees while we waited. He still tired easily from the virus, but his fever had broken. A woman named Elena met us at the door. She spoke to Caleb first, explained that he could stop at any time, and told him there were no right or wrong answers. She asked me to remain in the waiting room. Caleb looked back before following her. "You will be here?" he asked. "The whole time," I said. The door closed between us. I spent the next hour staring at the same page of a magazine without reading it. Through the wall, I could hear only the murmur of voices. Never enough to make out words. Every instinct told me to move closer, listen harder, and regain control. Instead, I stayed in my chair. When Elena came out, she did not hand me a transcript. She explained that Caleb had described repeated conversations with Brooke framed as games about safety and family. She would prepare a limited report for the appropriate professionals, but she would not give me every private detail unless it became necessary for his care. "What can you tell me?" I asked. "She asked him questions that encouraged him to compare you with her," Elena said. "He remembers being asked who stayed with him when you worked, whether he felt sad when you left, and who made him feel safest. Did she tell him what to say?" He did not describe being given exact answers. He described being praised when his responses favored her. That distinction made the manipulation more deliberate, not less. Brooke had not sat Caleb down and ordered him to lie. She had turned affection into a test. When he said he missed me, she asked another question. When he said he liked staying with her, she treated it as proof that he had answered correctly. Elena continued carefully. "He also believes his answers may have caused trouble for you. That guilt is more important right now than establishing a perfect timeline." When Caleb came out, he carried a drawing of 3 houses. One had smoke curling from the chimney, One had a large sun above it. The third stood at the edge of the page with no windows. I did not ask which house was mine. In the parking lot, Caleb climbed into the back seat and struggled with the zipper of his coat. I reached back to help him, but he pushed my hand away and tried again. On the third attempt, he managed it himself. "Did I make the people think you were bad?" he asked. I turned in my seat so he could see my face. "No, adults made choices. Nothing you said caused those choices. But Aunt Brooke said the questions helped protect you. She should not have made you responsible for protecting me. What if I answered wrong?" "There was no wrong answer. You are 7. You are allowed to miss me, love your aunt, feel angry with me, or wish I worked less. None of those feelings gives anyone permission to take you away." His mouth tightened. "Grandma says you are strong. She says that when she wants me to carry something that belongs to someone else." Caleb considered this longer than I expected. "Do I have to be strong?" "No, you only have to be a kid." He looked down at his gloves and nodded. For the first time since the storm, the tension left his shoulders. That afternoon, I began examining the parts of the situation that did not require Caleb's memory. The school sent me copies of the pickup records after Naomi made a formal preservation request. My mother had told me she watched Caleb herself on the afternoons I worked late. The records showed Brooke had signed him out 9 times during the previous 3 months. On 4 of those days, Nancy had texted me that Caleb was already at her house doing homework. Brooke had signed the school log as a family caregiver. That phrase was not illegal or necessarily deceptive, but it looked different beside everything else. She was not simply visiting him after school. She was taking him elsewhere while my mother gave me the impression he remained with her. I remembered one Friday when Caleb came home almost an hour late. His cheeks were pink from the cold, and he smelled like hot chocolate. Nancy said traffic had been bad. Caleb mentioned seeing ice sculptures downtown. When I asked my mother why she had taken him so far without telling me, she said Brooke had joined them, and the trip had been spontaneous. I had told them it could not happen again. At the time, I believed the boundary had been accepted. What had actually happened was that my mother learned to give me less information. The records also showed one afternoon when Brooke had picked Caleb up 30 minutes before Nancy claimed she arrived at the school. That was the day Caleb first told me Aunt Brooke had bought him new bedding. I had assumed it was for sleepovers. Naomi advised me to contact places only to confirm specific facts, not to accuse Brooke or ask people to interpret her behavior. I started with a cafe near the winter market. A receipt in one of Brooke's public photographs showed the cafe's name and date. The manager remembered her because Caleb had spilled cocoa across a display of holiday cards. She had helped clean it and brought him another drink. "I thought she was his mother," the manager said. Someone asked if he was her son, and she said, "He's mine today." I assumed she was joking. Did she correct anyone? Not that I heard. The words were small enough to dismiss in isolation. That was how Brooke had hidden in plain sight. She never needed to announce that she intended to replace me. She only had to let the idea live without correcting it. The winter market photographer was easier to locate. Brooke had posted one of his watermarked images online before deleting it after the storm. Naomi had already preserved a copy. The photographer checked his order records. The session had been booked under Brooke's name. The order description read, "Brooke and Son." "Did she provide that wording?" I asked. "Yes, we normally use whatever family label the customer requests." "Was anyone else photographed with them?" "No. She asked for just the 2 of them." I remembered that day. My mother had told me she was taking Caleb to the winter market. I had been working from home and planned to collect him before dinner. Nancy sent me one picture of Caleb beside a plastic snowman. Brooke had not appeared in it. She had been there the entire time. The photograph Naomi obtained showed Caleb in a blue coat with Brooke kneeling beside him, her arm wrapped around his waist. Both of them wore matching red scarves. Caleb was smiling naturally, with none of the tension he carried after the storm. That was the part that hurt most. He had been happy with her. Brooke had not invented their bond. She had taken something genuine and quietly changed its meaning. I called an employee at the furniture store after finding a purchase connected to the same afternoon. She remembered Caleb because he had spent several minutes choosing between bedding covered in planets and another set printed with dinosaurs. "He chose the planets," she said. The woman told him it would look perfect in his new room. Did she say where the room was? I assumed her house. She asked him what he wanted beside the bed and whether he would like a nightlight. Caleb had mentioned the planets when he came home. Brooke told me she was redecorating her guest room and wanted it to feel welcoming during sleepovers. I had told her he would not be sleeping at her apartment without my permission. She laughed and said I worried too much. I had not ignored every sign. I had challenged her, limited her access, and arranged a new after-school program. My mistake was believing she was impulsive rather than patient. I thought Brooke wanted attention in the moment. I did not understand that she had been building a future. When I picked Caleb up from his new after-school program, he showed me a paper airplane another child had made. He talked about snacks and a board game for most of the drive home. I did not ask about Brooke. Later, while we folded laundry, he picked up a shirt she had bought him and held it against his chest. Aunt Brooke said blue makes me look like Daddy, he said. She was right about that. He placed the shirt in the drawer. Did she ever ask you to keep something from me? I asked. It was the only direct question I allowed myself, and I kept my voice neutral. Caleb rubbed the seam of the shirt between his fingers. She said some things were surprises. What kind of things? He looked at me, and I could see him trying to decide whether answering would break another rule. You are not in trouble, I said. You do not have to tell me anything today. She said surprises only work if Mommy doesn't know. I waited, but he did not continue. I closed the drawer and changed the subject. 2 days later, Naomi's assistant called about the photograph from the winter market. The photographer had found the physical order packet in his archived files. Brooke had requested 2 framed copies. One had been delivered to her apartment. The other had gone to my parents' house. Joanne's older camera footage confirmed Brooke carrying a flat package through my parents' side door that same week. Through a formal request, Naomi obtained one of the frames after Paul agreed to return items connected to Caleb. He claimed he did not know where Nancy had placed it. A few hours later, he left it with his attorney, rather than hand it to me himself. The frame was simple white wood. From the front, it showed Brooke and Caleb smiling beneath artificial snow, posed like a holiday card. I turned it over. Brooke had written a message across the brown paper, backing in silver ink. Our first Christmas before everything changed. Beneath the words, she had added the date. It was nearly 2 months before she burned herself on the porch. The photograph stayed face down on Naomi's desk while she explained the next step. I had expected the words on the back to prove Brooke had been imagining a future with Caleb long before the porch. Naomi agreed that they mattered, but she warned me not to confuse something disturbing with something legally decisive. It shows intent, she said. It does not tell us how far they acted on it. I looked at the silver handwriting again. Our first Christmas before everything changed. Brooke had written that sentence nearly 2 months before she burned herself and accused me of attacking her. Whatever she believed was going to change, she had expected it before the incident she later claimed forced her to intervene. My phone vibrated on the desk. The message was from my father. Some of Caleb's things are still here. I can bring them out if you come by. Your mother does not want a scene. I handed the phone to Naomi. Do not go alone, she said. And do not enter the house unless the arrangement is clear. We will treat this as a property return, not a family conversation. Paul agreed to meet us the next morning. Naomi sent a junior associate named Claire to witness the exchange and document what was returned. I hated that collecting my son's belongings required a lawyer, but I hated even more that my family had made caution necessary. Snow still covered the edges of my parents' driveway when Claire and I arrived. Nancy remained behind the front window with the curtains parted just enough to watch us. Brooke's car was not there. Paul came through the garage carrying 2 plastic storage boxes and a canvas bag. You brought a lawyer to pick up toys? He asked. I brought a witness because you helped put bottles in my car. His eyes moved toward Claire, then back to me. I did not know what was in that bag. You unlocked my trunk. Brooke said she had something of Caleb's to return. And you never asked why she hid it beneath my emergency supplies? Paul lowered the boxes onto the driveway. I am trying to give his things back. That is the minimum, Dad. Not an act of generosity. He flinched at the word Dad, as if I had used it to accuse rather than address him. Claire photographed the sealed boxes before we opened them. Paul watched with growing discomfort while I checked each item against a simple inventory sheet. The first box held clothes. Some were recent, others had disappeared months earlier after visits to my parents' house. There was a blue jacket I had searched for before buying Caleb a replacement. A pair of sneakers sat beneath it, still dusted with dried mud. Brooke had once told me he must have left them at school. The canvas bag held school supplies. Pencils, notebooks, flashcards, and a small reading lamp were arranged as if someone had purchased a complete homework station. "Why did Brooke have all this?" I asked. Paul rubbed his hands together against the cold. "She wanted him to be comfortable during sleepovers. He has never slept at her apartment. She was planning ahead." "For what?" He looked toward the house. Nancy stepped away from the window. Paul reached into the second box and removed a folded sheet of paper. This was mixed in with the clothes. It was a printed list of Caleb's routines. Breakfast at 7, school drop-off at 8:10, snack at 3:30, bath at 7:15, reading before bed, lights out at 8:30. Beside each item, someone had written notes. No orange juice when sick. Needs nightlight after bad dreams. Hates seams in socks. Ask about Dad only if he brings it up. The handwriting belonged to Brooke. Some details were ordinary things any attentive aunt might know. Others belonged to the private rhythms of my home. "How did she get this information?" I asked. Paul shrugged. "Caleb talks." A 7-year-old did not explain the exact time his mother turned off the lights, or how she handled nights when grief returned. Brooke had either questioned him repeatedly, or Nancy had fed her details from the days she watched him. I continued through the box. There were old worksheets, 3 books Caleb had asked me about, and a small wooden dinosaur he thought he had lost at the winter market. Then I found the red glove. It was folded into the pocket of the blue jacket. For several seconds, I did not move. I could feel Claire watching me, waiting without intruding. The matching glove had fallen beneath my parents' porch railing during the storm. Joanne had recovered it the next day and placed it in an evidence bag for the officer, because it helped establish that Caleb had run outside without being properly dressed. I had assumed the second glove remained somewhere in my parents' living room. Instead, it had been stored with the clothes Brooke collected for a life he had never agreed to live. I set it on the edge of the box. Paul stared at it. "It is just a glove." "No," I said. "It is one more thing taken from his home and placed somewhere else without my permission. You are assigning meaning to everything now. I am checking what happened. Meaning comes after facts." That was the difference between us. Paul used uncertainty as a reason to stop looking. I used it as a reason to look more carefully. I photographed each item, including the glove, then placed it in a clean bag. I did not take it home for Caleb to see. He had already carried enough of the adult's choices. Before we left, I asked Paul directly whether Brooke had prepared a room for Caleb. His eyes shifted again toward the house. "She had a guest room." That was not my question. "She bought a bed and some clothes. People do that for family." "Did she put Caleb's name on the door?" Paul's silence answered before his mouth did. Claire wrote something on her pad. "Was the room at Brooke's apartment?" I asked. "Yes." "How long had it been ready?" "I do not know." "Before the storm?" He breathed out slowly. "Probably." "Before she photographed herself with him as mother and son?" "I do not know anything about that." "Did you help move the furniture?" Paul looked down at the boxes. I understood then that he had not merely known the room existed. He had carried pieces of it inside. He eventually agreed to send Naomi photographs he had taken while assembling the bed. He claimed he had photographed the room only to show Nancy the finished furniture. The images arrived that afternoon. Brooke's guest room had been transformed into a child's bedroom. A navy comforter covered a twin bed. Glow-in-the-dark planets spread across one wall. A small desk stood beside a shelf of books. Above the door hung a painted wooden sign. Caleb's room. The room was not prepared for occasional sleepovers. A weekly schedule was pinned beside the desk. It included a school start time, a bus pickup estimate, and an after-school activity near Brooke's apartment. One photograph showed 2 framed pictures on the dresser. In the first, Brooke and Caleb stood at the winter market in matching scarves. In the second, my parents stood with Caleb at his birthday party. I had originally been in that photograph. Someone had cropped me out. The cut was close enough that part of my sleeve remained beside Caleb's shoulder, a small strip of gray fabric without a body attached to it. I did not cry. The image was too deliberate for tears. Someone had looked at a photograph of my son between his mother and grandparents, then decided the easiest way to create a new family was to remove me from the frame. Naomi asked if I wanted a break. No, I want the source of every image recorded. We saved the photographs with Paul's email, preserved the original attachments, and noted that he had taken them before the storm. I did not call Brooke. I did not send the cropped photograph to Nancy and demand an explanation. Anger wanted confrontation. Intelligence required patience. The school information was easier to verify. Naomi contacted the elementary school near Brooke's apartment and requested confirmation limited to communications involving Caleb's name. The administrator remembered Brooke because she had asked unusually specific questions. Brooke had toured the school in early October. She said her nephew might live with her temporarily because of a family emergency. She asked which documents would be required if she became his guardian, and whether a child could begin classes before all court paperwork was final. The administrator had explained that Brooke could not enroll or transfer Caleb without legal authority and records from his current school. Brooke then asked about the bus route near her building. A week later, she emailed again and tried to add her address as Caleb's secondary residence. The request was rejected because she was not his parent or guardian. She did not complete any enrollment, Naomi reminded me. But the timing matters. The tour had taken place more than 6 weeks before the porch. Brooke had not simply fantasized about having Caleb's room ready. She had researched how to move his daily life from mine to hers. When I returned home, Caleb was building a cardboard city on the living room floor. His new after-school program had sent home empty boxes for a class project. He had drawn roads in black marker and made a hospital from a cereal carton. "Where does the school go?" he asked. "Wherever the people can reach it safely." He placed it in the center of the city. I watched him work and thought about the schedule on Brooke's wall. She had planned his school, meals, bedtime, and bus route. Everything had a place except his mother. Caleb looked up. "Did Grandpa give my blue jacket back?" "Yes." "Was my dinosaur there?" "Yes." He smiled with relief. I thought I lost it. I could have told him Brooke had kept it. I could have used the moment to make him angry with her. Instead, I said, "We found it, and it is safe." His sense of safety mattered more than recruiting him to my side. 2 days later, Brooke and Nancy filed sworn statements supporting a request for temporary restrictions on my care of Caleb. They described the porch as the moment the family first realized intervention might be necessary. Their language was polished. They called me emotionally unavailable, referred to an unsafe pattern, and described Caleb as a child begging for stability. They said Brooke began preparing a temporary place for him only after my alleged attack demonstrated that I was no longer capable of controlling myself. The photographs and school emails already contradicted that timeline. Naomi read the statements twice. "This was not written from scratch after the incident," she said. "How can you tell? The structure is too developed. It references concerns in a sequence that matches the earlier reports, and it turns the porch into a final event instead of a first event." She sent a preservation notice demanding that Brooke, Nancy, and their attorney retain every draft, email, attachment, and electronic file related to the statements and the preparation of Caleb's room. Because the hearing was approaching quickly, Naomi requested limited document exchange focused only on 2 questions: when the sworn statements had first been drafted and when Brooke began preparing to house Caleb. The other side objected. They argued that the request was intrusive and unnecessary. Naomi responded with the dated school emails, Paul's photographs, and Brooke's claim that she had acted only after the storm. The judge allowed the narrow request. For the next several days, nothing arrived. Then Naomi called me shortly after 6 in the evening. Her voice was controlled, but I heard the tension beneath it. "Their attorney has confirmed that Brooke's electronic folder contains multiple older versions of the statement," she said. "Those versions have to be produced before the hearing." I stood at my kitchen counter while Caleb slept upstairs. "How old?" "We do not know yet. We will receive the files with their production history." She paused. If the earlier version existed before the porch, their whole timeline collapses. The files arrived the following afternoon through the limited document exchange Naomi had requested. She called me to her office instead of sending them by email because she wanted me to understand exactly what they proved and what they did not. The folder had been produced by Brooke's attorney in response to the judge's order. It included several versions of the sworn statement, related email attachments, and a scan of a printed draft. Naomi's office saved the production history and preserved every file exactly as it had been received. I never touched Brooke's computer or gained access to any private account. The evidence had come from the other side through the legal process they had tried to resist. The oldest draft had been saved 11 days before the snowstorm. I read the first paragraph twice. It described me as a mother with a pattern of emotional instability who had become physically aggressive in front of her child. The date was blank, the location was blank, the type of injury was blank. The event had not happened yet, but the accusation was already waiting for it. A scanned copy of the same draft had handwritten notes in the margins. I recognized my mother's writing immediately. Nancy formed her capital letters with sharp, narrow strokes that leaned slightly forward. I had seen that handwriting on school permission slips, birthday cards, and the lists she left on the refrigerator when I was a child. Beside emotionally distant, she had written emotionally unavailable sounds more serious. Beside family disagreement, she had crossed out the words and replaced them with unsafe pattern. At the bottom of the page, she had added one more sentence. Caleb has been begging for stability. He had never begged her for anything of the kind. Paul's signature appeared only on the completed statement filed after the storm. That mattered because the early draft did not falsely make it look as though he had signed a description of an event before it occurred. Even without an early signature, the document showed that Brooke and Nancy had constructed the shape of the accusation first and left spaces for the incident that would complete it. Naomi placed the draft beside a still image from Joanne's camera. In the photograph, Brooke's hand was beneath the mug, while I stood several feet away. They did not write this after the porch, Naomi said. They built the porch to finish this. Hearing her say it aloud changed something in me. Until then, I had been looking at separate violations: the bottles in my car, the secret trips, the room, the school inquiry, the questions Brooke asked Caleb. The draft connected them. The porch was not an argument that escalated. It was a scene designed to produce the final line in a story they had already written. I asked Naomi what could actually happen at the upcoming hearing. I needed facts, not reassurance. No judge is going to hand your child to Brooke simply because 3 relatives accuse you, she said. But they are trying to create enough concern to support temporary restrictions or pressure you into a voluntary arrangement. What kind of arrangement? They will say Caleb should stay with family while the allegations are reviewed. Brooke has a room, flexible work, a bond with him, and some preparation as a possible foster or kinship caregiver. She cannot become his mother because she attended a class. No. Her preparation gives her no automatic right to him. The danger is practical, not magical. If Caleb were placed with her temporarily, she could later argue that he had become settled there and another move would hurt him. I understood the strategy. They did not need to win permanent custody in one afternoon. They only needed to get Caleb across Brooke's threshold and start a new clock. Then he does not go there, I said. Naomi held my gaze. Even if they offer to withdraw their allegations, especially then. The offer arrived the next morning. Nancy sent an email to Naomi and copied me. The subject line was family resolution. She wrote as if she were proposing a compassionate compromise between reasonable people. The family, she said, remained willing to support me through a period of instability. If I agreed to take temporary leave from work, attend anger management counseling, and allow Caleb to remain with Brooke for several weeks, they would reconsider pursuing restrictions through the court. Nancy described the arrangement as private and temporary. She promised that Caleb would stay close to his school and would be returned after I demonstrated that I was emotionally ready to resume full responsibility. She ended with a sentence that revealed more than she intended. This can all go away if Lauren stops fighting the people trying to save her son. I read the email without responding. My first impulse was to write back that I did not need anger management, that Brooke had burned herself, and that no one who locked a sick child outside was qualified to lecture me about safety. Naomi advised me to let the message remain exactly as it was. They are offering to soften their accusations if you surrender temporary care, she said. That is useful. It is also a threat. Yes, but we will not label it before we establish it. We preserve the email and present the sequence. I hated how often the correct strategy required silence. Silence had once been the tool my family used to control me. This was different. I was not swallowing the truth to protect them. I was choosing when and where the truth would have the most force. I gave Naomi my answer for the record. I would cooperate with child protection. I would provide work schedules, medical records, school records, and childcare documentation. I would adjust my hours if Caleb needed more time with me. I would attend family support counseling if a qualified professional believed it would help him. I would not admit to violence that never occurred, and I would not transfer Caleb to the people who had manufactured the allegation. Brooke's preparation as a caregiver became clearer through the documents produced for the hearing. Months earlier, she had attended an orientation for adults interested in foster care. She had begun preliminary steps toward a home study and told the program that she wanted to be ready if a child in her extended family ever needed emergency placement. Nothing in those records gave her rights over Caleb. On its surface, the explanation sounded responsible. The dates made it disturbing. Brooke started the process before she toured the school near her apartment, before she bought the bed, and before she told Caleb that children sometimes needed safer homes when their mothers became tired. She had been preparing herself as the solution while my mother helped invent the problem. The language in the accusations gave us another connection. The county would not identify the people behind anonymous reports, and I did not receive unrestricted copies of everything they had submitted. Marisol could tell me the nature of the concerns and the key phrases being evaluated: emotionally unavailable, unsafe pattern, a child begging for stability. I searched my old emails for those words. 2 years earlier, after Daniel died, Nancy had tried to convince me to sell my house and move back into my childhood bedroom with Caleb. I refused because I had a mortgage I could afford, a school Caleb knew, and no desire to return to a home where my mother treated every disagreement as disobedience. Nancy's reply had been waiting in my inbox ever since. Your refusal to accept help is becoming an unsafe pattern. Caleb needs stability, and an emotionally unavailable mother cannot give him what he is begging for. The phrasing was almost identical. Naomi did not claim that one email proved Nancy authored every report. She used it to demonstrate that the language attributed to supposedly independent concerns came directly from the vocabulary my mother had used for years. Brooke supplied the urgency, Nancy supplied the script. Paul continued insisting that he had known very little before the snowstorm. In his written response, he said Nancy and Brooke had handled the concerns about Caleb and had only asked him to sign the completed statement after witnessing my alleged attack. The electronic production contradicted him. An email forwarding the early draft had been sent to Paul 9 days before the porch. The subject line read, "Review Family Timeline." Nancy asked him to confirm the dates when I worked late, when Caleb had stayed at their house, and when he had supposedly appeared reluctant to leave with me. Paul replied less than an hour later. "Looks accurate. I don't want this turning into a court fight." He had known there was a timeline. He had known they were preparing allegations. He had simply hoped the threat of court would make me surrender before anyone examined the facts. I sent him one written question through Naomi. What did you believe the draft was being prepared for, and why did you later unlock my car for Brooke? He did not answer. Nancy answered for him. Paul had merely been trying to keep accurate family records, she wrote. He had no knowledge of Brooke's private concerns and should not be dragged into a dispute caused by my refusal to accept help. Her response protected him so aggressively that it exposed the system between them. Nancy decided what the family believed. Paul accepted the version that demanded the least courage from him. Brooke turned that permission into action. The court set an expedited hearing for the following week. Brooke requested temporary access and asked that Caleb be permitted to stay with her if the court found my home situation required further review. Nancy and Paul supported her as the relative best positioned to provide stability. Naomi and I prepared our response in layers. First came the medical record from urgent care, which documented Caleb's fever, his brief exposure, and the fact that I immediately moved him to shelter and sought treatment. Next came Joanne's original camera files, showing Brooke pouring water onto herself, Caleb running outside on his own, Nancy closing the door, and Paul locking it. Then came the older clip of Brooke placing the bag in my car, followed by the officer's recovery of the empty liquor bottles. We added the school pickup records, Brooke's unauthorized trips, the school inquiry near her apartment, the photographs of the prepared room, her foster orientation dates, and the early draft with Nancy's notes. My work records showed that Caleb had authorized care whenever I was away. His attendance, medical appointments, and teacher communications showed a child with a stable routine, not one abandoned between emergencies. Still, 3 adults planned to sit in court and tell the same story about me. Nancy would present herself as the worried grandmother. Paul would say he hated conflict but could no longer remain silent. Brooke would display the healing mark on her arm and claim she had acted only after I became violent. Their strength depended on repetition. If 3 family members said the same thing, they expected one widowed mother to look defensive simply for disagreeing. I did not need to prove I was perfect. I needed to show that their agreement had been organized before the facts existed. The evening before our final preparation meeting, Caleb sat at the kitchen table doing math homework while I adjusted my work calendar. I had already spoken with my supervisor about reducing late meetings and working from home twice a week until the case settled. He approved the change without asking for private details. Caleb looked at the colored blocks on my calendar. "Are you staying home because I got sick?" he asked. "I am changing a few things because our schedule can be better." "Did Grandma make you stop working?" "No one made me stop. I made a decision. That distinction mattered to both of us. I was willing to change, but I would not allow my family to present every adjustment as proof that they had been right about me." After Caleb went to bed, Naomi called. "I received a message from Paul's attorney," she said. "Paul wants to speak separately from Nancy and Brooke." "Why now?" "He says he has information relevant to the group messages and the preparation of the reports." I walked to the window. Snow had begun falling again, softer than the storm but bright beneath the streetlights. "What does he want in exchange?" "He has not said yet." Naomi paused before continuing. "He also says he kept an old device that Nancy believes was thrown away. Paul chose Naomi's office for the meeting because he said he did not want my mother to know where he was." That alone told me he was not arriving out of courage. He entered carrying an old black tablet inside a padded grocery bag. His shoulders were hunched beneath his winter coat, and he kept looking through the glass wall toward the reception area as if Nancy might appear behind him. Naomi's assistant documented the time, photographed the sealed bag, and asked Paul to explain where the device had been stored. "In the basement workshop," he said. "I stopped using it last year when the battery began failing." "Was it connected to your family message accounts?" Naomi asked. "It used to be. I turned it on yesterday, and some old conversations were still there." Naomi did not take the tablet immediately. She asked whether anyone had changed, deleted, or forwarded messages since he found it. "I opened the conversations," Paul said. "I did not delete anything." "Did you photograph the screen?" "A few pages." "Did you send those photographs to anyone?" "No." Naomi explained that a technician would preserve the device and create a forensic copy before we relied on anything it contained. I was not allowed to scroll through it myself, and I did not ask to. By then, I understood that evidence was strongest when my anger had never touched it. Paul sat across from me while the device remained on the table between us. "Nancy and Brooke are blaming me," he said. "They are saying I opened your car on my own." "You did open my car." "They are saying the bottles were my idea." "Were they?" "No." "Did you know what Brooke was putting inside?" He looked down. "Not exactly. That is not an answer. She said they needed something that would make the county take the drinking concerns seriously." "I thought the bag contained receipts or photographs." "You watched her hide it beneath my emergency supplies." "I should have asked." "You should have stopped her." Paul rubbed his palms together. "I knew it had gone too far, Lauren. I just did not know how to get out once your mother decided this was the only way to make you listen." The phrase made me lean back. "Make me listen to what?" "That you were working too much. That Caleb needed more stability, that Brooke could help for a while. Help does not require planting bottles in my car. I never thought anyone would take him permanently." "Then what did you think the statements were for?" "To scare you." He said it softly, as though lowering his voice reduced the cruelty. "You plan to accuse me of being unstable, violent, and unsafe so I would become frightened enough to surrender my son. Only temporarily." "Temporary to whom?" Paul did not answer. Naomi's technician arrived and collected the tablet. Paul signed a statement describing where he found it and confirming that it had belonged to him. Once the device left the room, Naomi asked why he had decided to bring it now. Paul's face tightened. Nancy has been telling her attorney that I handled the car and the door. Brooke says she did not know what was in the bag. They are preparing to say I misunderstood everything and acted without their approval. Did they tell you that directly? Naomi asked. I heard Nancy talking to Brooke. She said if the court asked about the bottles, they should say I panicked and tried to make Lauren look irresponsible. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. You are giving us the tablet because you realized they were going to sacrifice you. I'm giving it to you because the truth matters. The truth mattered when Caleb was outside. Paul's mouth opened, then closed. I had spent much of my childhood watching him avoid my mother's anger. Nancy would decide who was wrong, what had happened, and what apology was required. Paul rarely agreed with her openly. He simply remained quiet until everyone else accepted her version. He called that peace. When I was 12, Brooke broke a neighbor's window and blamed me. Paul knew I had been inside with him, but he said nothing until after I apologized. When I was 17, Nancy forced me to cancel a school trip because Brooke did not want to attend camp alone. Paul drove me to school the next morning and said he was sorry, as if sympathy after the decision erased his part in it. His silence had always looked passive. The tablet revealed that passivity was only the mask he wore over his choices. Why did you lock the door? I asked. He stared at me. You saw Caleb run onto the porch. You knew he was sick. Why did you turn the deadbolt? Nancy told me not to let you back in until the police came. The police had not been called yet. She said opening the door would ruin everything. What did everything mean? The incident. The record. I do not know. You knew enough to obey. Paul's eyes filled, but I did not rescue him from the answer. I thought you would go to Joanne's, he said. Her light was on. You were outside only a few minutes. You made a 7-year-old child pay for your comfort. I did not want him hurt. You wanted Mom calm more than you wanted him safe. The room became silent except for the heating vent above us. Paul looked older than he had 1 week earlier. For most of my life, that would have weakened me. I would have noticed his shaking hands, softened my voice, and found a version of the truth that allowed him to remain a decent man who had simply failed to act. I no longer needed that version. I am sorry, he said. What are you sorry for? For all of it. That is not specific enough. He swallowed. I am sorry I helped them prepare the timeline. I am sorry I opened your car. I am sorry I signed the statement without forcing Brooke to tell me exactly what happened. I am sorry I locked the door. He stopped before naming the part that mattered most. You are sorry because they turned against you, I said. That is not fair. Would you be sitting here if Nancy promised to protect you? He looked toward Naomi, as if she might stop the question. She did not. I do not know, he admitted. That was the first honest answer he gave me. The technician called Naomi 2 hours later. The tablet still contained synchronized copies of a family group conversation. Some messages had disappeared from Paul's current phone but remained in the tablet's local storage. The technician preserved the data and created a report showing how it was collected. Naomi reviewed the messages first, then she invited me into the conference room. The conversation did not contain a neat confession. Nancy had not written, "Let us frame Lauren and steal Caleb." The messages were shorter, more ordinary, and therefore more believable. 11 days before the storm, Nancy wrote, "We need one incident they can document, otherwise she will say we are exaggerating again." Brooke replied, "What counts as documented? Police or medical?" Nancy answered, "Either, as long as there is a record and Caleb is present." Paul's message appeared several minutes later. "I still have the spare key if you need something from the car." Brooke responded with a thumbs-up symbol that the export converted into a written description. Another exchange occurred 3 days before the storm. Brooke wrote, "His room is ready. The school said they need guardian papers before they can do anything." Nancy answered, "We handle placement first. The rest follows." Paul wrote, "I don't want him taken somewhere outside the family." Nancy replied, "Then do what we agreed and stop questioning every step." The afternoon of the storm, Brooke sent, "If she gets angry, Caleb needs to stay inside with us." Nancy answered, "He will. Keep him in the living room." Paul wrote, "What exactly are you planning?" Brooke replied, "Something they cannot dismiss as sister drama. The messages did not describe the mug, but they showed that all three expected a confrontation that would create an official record. Paul had not been a confused bystander. He knew they wanted an incident, knew Caleb was supposed to remain inside, and offered the key used to access my car. There was another message sent 20 minutes before I arrived at my parents' house. Nancy wrote, "Do not lose your nerve when she says she is taking him home. This only works if we stay consistent." Brooke replied, "I know what I'm doing." Paul did not respond. His silence in the group conversation looked exactly like his silence in my childhood. He wanted the benefits of the plan without leaving enough words to be held responsible for it. Naomi warned me that the messages still needed context. Brooke could claim they were discussing a legitimate intervention. Nancy could argue that documented incident referred to recording my existing behavior rather than manufacturing it. That is why the messages matter beside the video, the bottles, the draft statement, and the prepared room, Naomi said. Each source closes a gap left by the others. The technician also recovered photographs Paul had taken of the tablet screen before bringing it to us. Those copies were less important than the preserved device, but they confirmed that Paul had seen the messages before meeting Naomi. He could no longer claim he discovered everything only after turning it over. When Nancy learned that Paul had met separately with my lawyer, she sent Naomi an email saying he was under severe emotional strain and had recently shown signs of confusion. She suggested that any statements from him should be treated cautiously. Brooke sent her own statement that evening. She claimed Paul had placed the bottles in my car without explaining his intention. According to her, she had carried the bag only because he asked for help while his hands were full. The camera showed Paul standing beside an empty driveway while Brooke carried the bag. Nothing was in his hands except the key. Their alliance began collapsing before the hearing even started. Paul called me that night. I let the call go to voicemail. "Lauren, I gave you what you needed," he said. "I hope when this is over, you will let me explain things to Caleb. I want him to know I never meant for him to be hurt." I saved the recording. He still believed cooperation entitled him to access. He had not yet understood that helping after betrayal did not erase the betrayal itself. The following morning, Naomi called about one final item recovered from the tablet. It was not a text message. It was an audio file Brooke had sent directly to Nancy about a week before the storm. The technician confirmed the original date and preserved it with the rest of the device data. Naomi asked me to come to the office before she played it. Brooke's voice emerged through the conference room speaker, lower and less polished than the voice she used in public. "You promised once he was placed with me, Lauren would never get him back." There was a pause in the recording, followed by the faint sound of a door closing. Then Nancy answered, "Then don't lose your nerve now." The morning of the hearing, I left Caleb with the woman who ran his new after-school program. She had agreed to keep him for the entire day, and Naomi had made it clear that bringing him to court would serve no purpose except allowing my family to use his presence against me. Caleb knew I had a meeting about the storm, but I did not tell him 3 adults planned to describe his mother as dangerous. Before I left, he handed me the pair of red gloves we had finally reunited. "You can take them so you don't get cold," he said. I placed them in my handbag. I had no intention of holding them up in court or turning them into a symbol for strangers. They were simply a reminder of who the hearing was meant to protect. Naomi met me outside the courtroom and reviewed our goal one final time. "We are not here to prove every offense they may have committed," she said. "We are here to show there is no basis to remove Caleb from your care or place him with Brooke. And the false reports? Those will be examined separately. Today we establish the timeline." That distinction helped me walk into the room without carrying the burden of winning everything at once. Brooke sat beside her attorney with a pale bandage covering part of her forearm. The burn had already begun healing, but she had chosen a short-sleeved blouse that made the injury easy to see. Nancy sat directly behind her. Paul took a seat beside my mother but left several inches between them. None of them looked at me when I entered. Brooke spoke first. She described herself as an aunt who had stepped in after my husband died. She said she had watched Caleb become increasingly anxious whenever I worked late. According to her, I had grown defensive whenever the family raised concerns about my drinking, my schedule, or my temper. She said the porch incident changed everything. "I tried to speak to Lauren privately," Brooke told the court. "She became angry when I said Caleb needed more stability. She threw hot water at me, grabbed him, and went into the storm. Her voice trembled at the right moments. She said she had never wanted custody of my son and had only prepared her apartment after realizing he might need somewhere safe. Naomi wrote a note but did not interrupt. Brooke's attorney asked when she first believed Caleb could not remain safely with me. "The night of the storm," Brooke said. Naomi underlined something on her paper. Nancy repeated the same story with greater certainty. She said I had dragged Caleb outside while he cried to stay with his grandparents. She claimed she closed the door only because I was behaving violently, and she feared I would come back inside to attack Brooke again. "What about Caleb's coat and medication?" Naomi asked when it was her turn. Nancy folded her hands. "Everything happened very quickly. Did Lauren ask you to return those items?" "I do not remember her exact words." "Did you see Caleb outside in socks?" "He ran after his mother." "That was not my question." Nancy's mouth tightened. "Yes." "Did you open the door?" "No. We were waiting for the police." The police had not been called until Joanne contacted emergency services. But Naomi did not argue. She let Nancy's answer remain in the record. Paul spoke more quietly. He confirmed that I had argued with Brooke and that Caleb had gone outside, but he avoided saying he saw me throw water. When Brooke's attorney asked whether he believed I had become unstable, Paul stared at the table. "I believed the family needed help," he said. It was the language of a man still trying to stand nowhere. Then Naomi presented Joanne's video. The room went silent as the image appeared on the monitor. Brooke and I stepped onto the porch. She held the mug. I stood several feet away. The wind distorted most of our voices, but the movement was unmistakable. Brooke transferred the mug to her left hand, positioned her right arm beneath it, and tipped the water onto herself. My body moved backward before the ceramic struck the boards. Brooke's face changed as she watched. Her lips parted, then pressed together. Nancy leaned toward her attorney and whispered something he did not answer. The recording continued. "Caleb emerged from the house wrapped in his blanket. He ran to me without anyone touching or pulling him." Nancy shoved the backpack onto the porch. The door closed. Paul's hand moved toward the lock. Brooke remained inside. Through the glass panel, she looked directly at Caleb while I wrapped my coat around him. No one needed to explain what the video showed. The absence of movement from my family was more powerful than an accusation. 3 adults stood in a heated house while a sick child shivered a few feet away. When the recording ended, Brooke's attorney said the angle did not capture everything that had happened before we went outside. Naomi agreed. "It captures the conduct Miss Brooke Whitmore described under oath," she said. "It shows that conduct did not occur. Brooke claimed she had moved the mug because I reached toward her outside the camera's view." Naomi replayed the relevant seconds. "Both of my hands were visible." Brooke then said she might have spilled the water accidentally because she was afraid. Naomi asked why she had immediately screamed that I attacked her. "I was in shock." "Were you also in shock when you later told police Lauren had thrown the contents of the mug?" "I believed she caused it." "With her hands several feet away?" Brooke looked toward Nancy. My mother stared straight ahead. The second video had been recorded 3 weeks earlier. It showed my car in the driveway, Paul unlocking the trunk, and Brooke placing the dark bag beneath my emergency supplies. Brooke had previously stated in writing that she had never opened or placed anything inside my vehicle. Naomi read that sentence aloud, then paused the video on Brooke's hand closing the trunk. "What was in the bag?" she asked. "I did not know. Why did you deny touching the vehicle?" "I forgot." "Did you forget the bag, the car, or your father unlocking it for you?" Brooke's attorney objected to the tone, and Naomi moved on without pressing. She did not need to force an answer when the contradiction was already visible. Paul admitted he had provided the spare key. "Nancy said Brooke needed to return something that belonged to Caleb," he said. "Did you later learn the bag contained empty liquor bottles?" Naomi asked. "Yes." "When?" Paul glanced at Brooke. "Before the hearing." "Did you place them in Lauren's car?" "No." "Did Lauren ask you to open the car?" "No." "Did you tell her Brooke had placed a hidden bag inside?" "No." The officer's photographs documented where the bag had been recovered. The bottles were not proof that I drank. They were proof that someone had placed objects associated with drinking in the same vehicle mentioned in an earlier report about alcohol. Naomi did not claim more than the evidence established. She moved to the timeline. The first document was Brooke's foster care orientation record. It showed she had begun preparing herself as a potential caregiver months before the storm. The second was the furniture receipt for the twin bed and planetary bedding. The third was the school administrator's confirmation that Brooke had toured the school near her apartment and asked how to enroll Caleb if she became his guardian. The fourth was the photograph of Caleb's prepared room, taken by Paul before the porch incident. His name was already mounted above the door. The fifth was the winter market order labeled Brooke and Son. Then Naomi displayed the earliest version of the sworn statement produced from Brooke's electronic folder. It had been saved 11 days before the storm. The date of the alleged violent incident was blank. The location was blank. The document already described me becoming physically aggressive in front of my child. Nancy's handwritten changes appeared in the margins. Emotionally unavailable. Unsafe pattern. Caleb has been begging for stability. Brooke stared at the screen as though the document belonged to someone else. Her attorney argued it was only a contingency draft prepared in case my conduct escalated. Naomi nodded. That is precisely the issue, she said. They drafted the conclusion, prepared the placement, contacted the school, and planted objects connected to an alcohol allegation before the incident they now claim caused them to act. The group messages followed. We need one incident they can document, either police or medical, as long as there is a record and Caleb is present. His room is ready. We handle placement first. The rest follows. The messages did not state every action explicitly, but they placed the room, the reports, the key, and the planned incident on one timeline. Brooke's attorney tried to restore her image as a concerned aunt. He asked her why she had prepared the room if she did not yet believe Caleb was unsafe. Because Lauren's schedule was getting worse, she said. When did you first believe he might need to live with you? He asked. Brooke gave a date in early November. Naomi stood. The furniture receipt is dated in September. The school tour occurred in early October. The photograph labeled Brooke and Son was taken before the date she just gave. Brooke began speaking before Naomi finished. I did not know exactly when it would happen. When what would happen? Naomi asked. When Lauren would finally prove everyone right. The room became completely still. Brooke realized she had gone too far, but instead of stopping, she leaned into the belief she had protected for months. I knew she would fail eventually, she said. She was exhausted. She put work first. Caleb needed someone prepared for the day she could not handle him anymore. Naomi did not raise her voice. So you prepared to replace his mother before any event showed he was unsafe? I prepared to protect him. By placing bottles in his mother's car? I told you I did not know what was in the bag. By allowing a sick child to remain outside after you falsely accused his mother of burning you? Brooke looked at the judge. I was injured. You injured yourself. Her face hardened. For the first time, the frightened, loving aunt disappeared. What remained was a woman furious that reality had refused to reward her preparation. Nancy tried to separate herself from Brooke. She said the room and school inquiries had been her daughter's decisions. She claimed her handwritten notes were only suggestions for making a family concern easier to understand. Then Naomi played the audio recovered from Paul's tablet. Brooke's voice filled the room. You promised once he was placed with me, Lauren would never get him back. Nancy answered, Then don't lose your nerve now. My mother closed her eyes. Paul turned toward her, not with shock, but with the look of a man hearing publicly what he had already chosen not to confront. The judge did not deliver a dramatic speech. She reviewed the evidence, asked several questions about Caleb's current care, and confirmed that child protection had found no immediate safety threat in my home. She denied the request to remove Caleb from my care or place him with Brooke. Existing restrictions on contact remained in effect. Brooke, Nancy, and Paul were prohibited from approaching Caleb at school, contacting him through other relatives, or presenting themselves as authorized caregivers. The court also directed that the questionable reports, the early draft, the planted bottles, and the conduct during the storm be forwarded to the appropriate agencies for separate review. No one was arrested in the courtroom. Brooke remained seated after the decision, staring at the table. Nancy whispered urgently to her attorney. Paul looked at me as if the result had opened a door between us. It had not. I left the red gloves inside my handbag. I had protected Caleb without placing his childhood on display. Outside the courtroom, Naomi and I were gathering our files when a woman introduced herself as an investigator assigned to review the new evidence. She said the custody question had been resolved for the moment, but the source of the reports and the manufactured evidence required separate interviews. "Will you need to speak to Caleb again?" I asked. "Not unless it becomes necessary, and we will coordinate through the appropriate specialist." That was the first question I cared about. The investigator glanced toward the courtroom doors, where Brooke, Nancy, and Paul still waited with their attorneys. "We will be speaking to each of them separately," she said. "We need to determine who created the reports, who placed the evidence, and who made the decision to leave your son outside." I had kept Caleb. Now my family would have to survive without a shared story. Keeping Caleb after the hearing did not end the fight. It only removed the reason my family had been pretending to stand together. Once the investigator began interviewing them separately, the story they had repeated for months broke into 3 incompatible versions. Each person still claimed the plan had been about protecting Caleb, but none of them wanted to accept responsibility for the parts that could carry consequences. Brooke turned against my mother first. Through her attorney, she provided emails and voice messages that had not appeared in the original document exchange. She said Nancy had manipulated her grief, encouraged her attachment to Caleb, and convinced her that taking him from me was an act of rescue. One email had been sent after Brooke attended the foster care orientation. My mother wrote, "You have more maternal instinct than Lauren ever did. Maybe this is why you were never meant to have just any child. Maybe you were meant to be ready for Caleb." Brooke answered, "Do you really think he could be happier with me?" Nancy replied, "I think he already is. We just need the right people to see it." Another message followed after I announced the new after-school arrangement. Nancy wrote, "She is cutting us out because she knows you understand him better. If we do nothing now, she will isolate him completely." Brooke used those messages to describe herself as a vulnerable daughter influenced by a controlling mother. Her attorney argued that Nancy had fed an unhealthy belief until Brooke no longer understood where concern ended and possession began. It explained part of what happened. It did not excuse it. Nancy had encouraged the fantasy, but Nancy had not held the mug. She had not carried the bag of bottles into my trunk. She had not asked Caleb questions and rewarded him when his answers favored his aunt. Brooke had made those choices herself. When the investigator asked why she poured hot water onto her own arm, Brooke said she panicked. She claimed the original plan had been to provoke an argument loud enough for my parents to witness. According to her, she had expected me to yell, perhaps shove past her, and provide the incident the family needed. When I remained calm, she felt the entire plan slipping away. So she created the injury. Her explanation was not remorse. It was an attempt to transform planning into pressure and cruelty into desperation. Nancy responded within a day. She denied ever instructing Brooke to injure herself or plant evidence. She described the emails as emotional support offered to a daughter who had suffered several personal disappointments. She said phrases such as "meant for Caleb" were affectionate exaggerations, not instructions to take a child. My mother's attorney portrayed Brooke as unstable, obsessive, and increasingly difficult to control. The same daughter Nancy had called Caleb's safest option was suddenly too irrational to be trusted. That argument created another problem for her. If Brooke had been so unstable, why had Nancy supported placing Caleb in her apartment? Why had she helped prepare the sworn statement? Why had she supplied language for the reports and encouraged Paul to cooperate? The handwritten notes on the early draft remained difficult to explain. Nancy said she had edited the statement only because Brooke's writing was disorganized. The investigator asked why she changed family disagreement to unsafe pattern. Nancy said the phrase sounded more accurate. She was then asked how she knew Caleb had been begging for stability. My mother could not identify a single occasion when he used those words. She finally admitted they were her interpretation of his behavior. That was how she had controlled our family for years. She converted her interpretation into another person's truth, then treated disagreement as dishonesty. Paul tried a different strategy. He continued cooperating. He explained that Nancy had asked him to preserve dates from my work schedule. He admitted unlocking my car and acknowledged that Brooke said the hidden bag would make the county take the alcohol reports seriously. He confirmed that my mother told him not to open the door after Caleb ran outside because doing so would undermine the incident. He also admitted that he knew Brooke's room had been prepared for more than occasional visits. Each admission made the investigation clearer, and his own position slightly worse. Paul's attorney emphasized that he had surrendered the tablet voluntarily and provided information that neither Brooke nor Nancy intended to disclose. He hoped cooperation would reduce whatever consequences followed. Paul hoped for something else too. He asked Naomi whether he could see Caleb under supervision. The request arrived less than 2 weeks after the hearing. He says he wants to apologize, Naomi told me. Has Caleb asked to see him? No. Then the answer is no. Naomi reminded me that the no-contact restrictions already prevented Paul from approaching Caleb. Any future change would require careful review. I do not want him rewarded because he became useful, I said. That is a reasonable position. Paul later sent a letter through his attorney. He wrote that he understood why I was angry, but believed separating Caleb from his grandparents would create another loss after Daniel's death. He still framed access to my son as something owed to him. I answered through Naomi. Any future contact would depend on Caleb's emotional safety, professional guidance, and Paul's ability to accept responsibility without demanding forgiveness. His cooperation with investigators would not purchase a relationship. I did not promise that the door would remain closed forever. I also refused to hold it open because he finally told the truth when lying became dangerous. Brooke's most immediate consequence arrived in writing. The agency reviewing her foster care application closed the process and declined to approve her as a caregiver. The decision cited material dishonesty, serious boundary violations, manipulation involving a specific child, and conduct inconsistent with providing safe care. The letter did not call her evil. It did something more devastating. It concluded that she could not be trusted with the authority she wanted. Her attorney challenged parts of the decision, but the result did not change. She would not become Caleb's kinship placement, and the information uncovered during the case would have to be addressed in any future attempt to foster. The no-contact order remained in place. Brooke was prohibited from calling Caleb, contacting him through relatives, appearing at his school, sending gifts, or posting photographs that identified him. The separate investigation into the false report, the bottles, and the storm continued. No one promised me a dramatic prison sentence. Different actions required different findings, and Brooke's cooperation against Nancy complicated the process. Naomi warned me that any final resolution could involve negotiated admissions, supervision, probation, treatment requirements, or restrictions rather than years behind bars. I was less interested in the length of a sentence than I had expected. Brooke had wanted an official institution to name her as the better mother. Instead, an official institution determined that she was not safe to serve as a caregiver. That consequence struck at the center of the identity she had built. News of the porch video began spreading after someone connected to the case mentioned it outside the formal proceedings. A local blogger contacted me first. 2 days later, a regional reporter left a voicemail. Both wanted an interview. The blogger promised to expose the family that tried to steal a widow's child. The reporter said the case raised important questions about false child welfare reports and kinship care screening. At first, I considered it. Public attention could destroy the version of events Brooke had shared with friends. It could prevent Nancy from telling relatives that the court had ignored a genuine safety concern. It could make every person who had praised Brooke's devotion see exactly what she had done on the porch. Then the questions arrived. Could they show Caleb's photograph? Would I discuss what he told the child specialist? Did he still love his aunt? Had he asked whether she was going to jail? Could they use the picture labeled Brooke and Son? The story they wanted was not only mine. They wanted Caleb's confusion, his grief, and the private words he had spoken because an adult told him it was a game. I declined both interviews. The blogger offered to blur his face. I still said no. Naomi helped me issue one written statement. My son is not evidence for public consumption. The relevant authorities have received the original recordings and documents. I will not discuss his private statements, treatment, or emotional recovery. Brooke accused me of trying to silence her. Through a friend, she posted that she had loved too deeply and trusted the wrong person. She did not specify whether the wrong person was Nancy or me. I saved the post for Naomi and did not answer publicly. Refusing to expose Caleb was not mercy toward Brooke. It was a boundary she could no longer cross. She had already used his affection as proof that he belonged to her. I would not use his pain as proof that she deserved destruction. Caleb knew only what he needed to know. He knew he would not be sent to Brooke's apartment. He knew he was safe at home. He knew the adults who had lied were not allowed to contact him. One evening, while we were sorting books for his bedroom, he found a dinosaur encyclopedia Brooke had given him. He held it for a long time without opening it. "Do I have to throw this away?" he asked. "No, the book did not do anything wrong. Can I keep liking it?" "Yes." He placed it on the shelf. After a moment, he asked, "Is Aunt Brooke sad?" "I think she probably is. Because she cannot see me? That may be part of it." He sat on the floor and pulled his knees against his chest. "I don't hate her. You do not have to. She did fun things before the games." "I know." Caleb traced the edge of the book with one finger. "I don't want to play her games anymore." The sentence was quiet, but it contained more certainty than any speech an adult could have written for him. "You never have to," I said. "What if she says it is not a game next time?" "There will not be a next time unless safe adults agree that seeing her is good for you. You will not have to decide alone." He nodded and returned to arranging the books. I did not ask him to forgive Brooke. I did not ask him to reject every good memory. Children should not have to rewrite their own past to make adults comfortable with the present. Several weeks later, Naomi called while I was leaving work. The investigations had not ended, but the family's attorneys wanted to resolve several practical matters. My parents still possessed a few of Caleb's belongings, the spare key, and an outdated school card. Incorrect statements submitted to the school and county also needed to be addressed. Nancy had requested one final meeting. She says she wants to return everything, discuss written corrections, and keep this from destroying the entire family, Naomi told me. "The entire family is already destroyed." "I know. The meeting could still create a clear record and close several loose ends." "Who would attend?" "You, me, their attorneys, Nancy, Paul, and Brooke. Neutral office, no private conversation." I thought about my mother's favorite pattern. She would create a crisis, gather everyone in one room, and demand that the strongest person absorb the damage so the family could continue pretending nothing fundamental had changed. This time, I would enter the room knowing exactly what she was doing. "I will attend," I said, "but Caleb will not be there." Naomi agreed immediately. I looked through the windshield at the snow gathering along the parking lot. 8 months later, I can still remember how calm I felt when I made that decision. My family wanted one final chance to save itself. I was going to use the meeting to make sure they could never again ask my son to do it for them. The final family meeting took place in a conference room at Naomi's office 3 weeks after the hearing. It was not therapy, mediation, or an attempt at reconciliation. The attorneys had arranged it to return property, correct false information, and establish how any future communication would be handled. Caleb was at his after-school program. I had not told my family where it was located. I arrived carrying a cardboard box. Inside were the spare car key Paul had used, the outdated school pickup card, several items Brooke had sent back, and the framed winter market photograph labeled Brooke and Son. Naomi sat beside me near the door. I chose that seat deliberately. I did not want to be surrounded, and I was no longer willing to enter a room on my mother's terms. Nancy arrived with her attorney. She wore a dark blue coat and carried no bag. Paul entered behind her, but sat at the far end of the table instead of beside her. Brooke came last. She looked thinner than she had at the hearing. The burn on her arm had faded to a patch of pink skin. She glanced at the box in front of me, then looked away before she could see what was inside. For several seconds, no one spoke. Nancy finally placed both hands on the table. "Whatever has happened, we are still Caleb's family." She said family the way she had always said it, as though the word settled every argument before it began. Naomi opened the meeting by reviewing the practical issues. My parents were required to return the remaining key, Caleb's medical card copy, and any school documents in their possession. Written corrections would be sent to the school and county offices that had received false or misleading information. All future contact had to go through the attorneys while the restrictions remained in effect. Nancy barely listened. "This investigation is destroying Brooke," she said. "It is affecting her work, her health, and any chance she has of building a normal life." Brooke stared at the tabletop. Nancy turned toward me. "Your father and I are not young. We cannot spend the rest of our lives fighting our own daughter. There has been enough punishment. You are discussing consequences, I said, not punishment. We made mistakes because we were worried about Caleb. You prepared accusations before the event you claimed caused your concern. We believed something would happen eventually. That is not the same as witnessing it. Nancy's attorney touched her arm, but she pulled away. You know Brooke is not as strong as you, she said. She has always felt things more deeply. You can survive this, she cannot. There it was again. The sentence that had followed me from childhood into adulthood. I could endure disappointment because Brooke cried louder. I could surrender opportunities because she needed them more. I could absorb cruelty because I was supposedly strong enough to carry it. Being stronger never made me responsible for protecting her from her choices, I said. Nancy's face tightened. She loves your son. So do I. You have a career. You have your house. You have always been capable of rebuilding. Brooke has already lost so much. Caleb is not compensation for what Brooke believes she lost. Brooke lifted her head. I never called him compensation. You prepared a room, a school route, and a legal statement before you had any reason to believe he needed another home. I was preparing for an emergency. You were preparing for my removal. I thought you would fail. Her attorney shifted beside her, but Brooke continued. You were exhausted after Daniel died. You worked late. You depended on Mom and Dad. Caleb came alive when he was with me, and you hated seeing that. I was grateful when you helped him. You were threatened by our relationship. I was threatened by what you did with it. Brooke's voice softened. Does he ask about me? I had known the question would come. It was the only reason she had agreed to sit in the same room with me. I answered carefully. He remembers you. Her eyes filled. Does he miss me? That is private. You cannot give me one answer after everything I did for him. What you did for him before does not erase what you did to him later. I helped him after his father died. You could barely get out of bed. I was the one who took him to the park. I was the one who made him laugh. You did help him. Brooke blinked, surprised by the admission. He loved you, I continued. He trusted you. That is why your actions hurt him so deeply. Her lips trembled. I would never have hurt him. You watched him stand outside in a storm because opening the door would have ruined your accusation. I was injured. You injured yourself. I panicked. You had already prepared his room. Because Mom said you were going to cut us off. I reached into the box and removed the framed photograph. I placed it in the center of the table with the image facing Brooke. She and Caleb smiled beneath artificial snow, dressed in matching scarves. The order label still identified them as mother and son. Brooke stared at it. You took something real, I said. He cared about you. You used the love he gave you as evidence that he belonged to you. He did belong with me. The words left her before she could stop them. Nancy turned sharply. Brooke. You told me he did, Brooke said. I told you he needed support. You said I was the mother he should have had. I was comforting you. You promised once he was placed with me, Lauren would never get him back. Nancy glanced at the attorneys. That recording has been taken out of context. Naomi did not reach for any files. No one needed to play the audio again. Every person in the room knew exactly what it contained. Brooke leaned toward my mother. You told me to stay consistent. You said the county needed a documented incident. I never told you to burn yourself. You knew what we were doing. I knew you planned to confront her. I did not know you would behave like a lunatic. Brooke recoiled. You said I was protecting him. I said we had concerns. You turned those concerns into an obsession. Paul finally spoke. You told us the placement would be temporary. Nancy faced him. And you signed the statement. You wrote it. You reviewed the timeline. You told me it was to make Lauren slow down. You had the key. You told me to give it to Brooke. Within minutes, the family that once presented one polished story had returned to its oldest habit. Each person pushed responsibility toward the next, hoping blame would stop before it reached them. Paul looked at me. I gave your lawyer the tablet. I know. Without it, you might never have found those messages. That does not change what you did before you handed it over. I am trying to make this right. You are trying to reduce the consequences. His expression collapsed into the same wounded look he had used throughout my childhood, whenever I refused to reward his regret. I chose to tell the truth, he said. You told the truth when lying became dangerous for you. That is not the same as choosing us. I did not know Brooke would hurt herself. You knew they needed an incident. I thought the threats would make you reconsider your schedule. You helped them accuse me of being unsafe so I would become frightened enough to surrender my child. I only wanted peace. You locked the door while my son stood in a storm. That was a choice. Paul looked down at his hands. Nancy spoke before he could answer. You are acting as if we wanted Caleb injured. No one wanted that. You wanted the scene to continue, I said. His safety became less important than keeping your story consistent. We believed Joanne would open her door. You did not know that. You were outside for only a few minutes. Because I stopped waiting for you to become decent. Nancy's attorney asked that we return to the practical terms. Naomi placed a written summary on the table. I had reviewed every line before the meeting. Brooke could not contact Caleb directly or indirectly. She could not send gifts through relatives, appear at his school, create new social media accounts to watch him, or ask other people to obtain information about him. Nancy and Paul could not visit Caleb while the no-contact restrictions and safety evaluations remained in effect. Any future consideration of contact would depend on Caleb's needs, recommendations from qualified professionals, and evidence that the adult involved could accept responsibility. It would not depend on family pressure, birthdays, holidays, illness, or claims that too much time had passed. No one in the family could post Caleb's name, photographs, school information, private statements, or details about his treatment. I would not withdraw the evidence, alter my statement, or ask the authorities to soften their findings. I would also not release Caleb's interviews, treatment notes, or private questions to reporters in order to humiliate them. Brooke looked at me. You will let strangers think I am a monster, but you will not let me defend myself. You can speak about your own choices. You cannot use my son to repair your image. What am I supposed to tell people? The truth is available. Nancy pushed the written terms away. This is not a boundary, it is revenge. No. Revenge would be exposing every private thing Caleb said and letting the public tear you apart with it. I am refusing to do that. Then what do you call this? Protection. You have already won. This was never about winning. It always is with you, Brooke said. You always have to be the capable one, the successful one, the person everyone eventually believes. I did not make you pour water onto your arm. You made me desperate. No, you made yourself entitled. Brooke's face changed. But she did not answer. I removed the old-school pickup card and placed it beside the photograph. Then, I set down the spare car key. Paul stared at it. That key was for emergencies, I said. You used it to help create one. I added the returned medical card copy and the last of Caleb's belongings to the table. There was nothing dramatic about the objects. They were pieces of access my family had treated as ownership. Nancy looked from the key to the photograph. So this is it? She asked. You are destroying the family because none of us handled one terrible night correctly? It was not one night. We can recover from this. Recovery requires truth. We have admitted mistakes. You have admitted whatever the evidence made impossible to deny. Her face hardened. You will regret keeping Caleb from people who love him. I will regret every moment he spends. Believing love requires him to keep secrets, answer correctly, or protect adults from their own choices. Nancy stood. You are punishing all of us because you cannot forgive. I remained seated. No, I am ending the part where protecting this family always meant sacrificing my child or myself. The meeting ended without anyone signing a declaration of peace. Their attorneys collected the documents. Brooke refused to take the framed photograph, so Naomi placed it back in the box for the legal file. As I walked toward the door, Paul called my name. I did not turn around. Behind me, Brooke accused Nancy of abandoning her. Nancy said Brooke had ruined everything by losing control. Paul told both of them to stop, using the same weak voice he had once called peace. The elevator doors closed before I heard the rest. In the lobby, my phone vibrated. The message came from the woman caring for Caleb. She had attached a photograph of his hands resting on a table. One red glove lay on the left. Its matching glove lay on the right. Beneath the picture, she had written, Caleb found the other glove in his bag. He wants to know if the two of them can stay together now. By the time I am telling this story, 8 months have passed since the night my family locked Caleb and me outside in the snow. The legal consequences did not arrive in one dramatic afternoon. There were interviews, amended statements, negotiations, and weeks when nothing seemed to move. Naomi warned me that real accountability often looked disappointingly slow from the outside. Brooke eventually accepted a resolution that placed her under supervised probation and required psychological treatment. The no-contact order remained in effect, and she was prohibited from reaching Caleb through relatives, social media, gifts, or messages, disguised as apologies. Her foster care application was formally denied. The letter cited dishonesty, serious boundary violations, manipulation involving a child, and conduct inconsistent with safe caregiving. Brooke had spent months trying to persuade institutions that she was the better person to raise my son. The final official conclusion said she was not someone who should be trusted with that responsibility. She did not receive a long prison sentence. Naomi had prepared me for that. Brooke had cooperated against Nancy, had no serious prior record, and agreed to treatment and strict supervision. I did not need to imagine her behind bars to feel that justice had been done. She had wanted Caleb to validate the identity she had created for herself. Instead, she lost access to him and had to face the fact that love did not make her safe. Nancy's consequences were different. Investigators concluded that she had shaped the language used in the reports, helped organize the timeline against me, encouraged Paul to cooperate, and supported the plan to keep Caleb inside while Brooke created the final incident. She had not poured the water or carried the bottles, but she had created the structure that made those actions possible. She was required to correct the false information sent to Caleb's school and the county. The letter she signed did not say that our family had experienced a misunderstanding. It stated that several claims about my alcohol use, supervision, and emotional condition had not been supported, and that information had been presented in a misleading way. For a woman who had spent her life deciding what the family version of truth would be, signing that correction was a consequence she could not talk her way around. Her access to Caleb remained suspended. Any future request for contact would require professional review and proof that she could accept responsibility without blaming me, Brooke, stress, grief, or family concern. She sent 2 letters through her attorney. The first explained why she had been afraid for Caleb. The second explained how much she was suffering without him. Neither letter contained a direct acknowledgement that she had chosen to leave a sick child outside because opening the door would have weakened her plan. I did not answer. Paul received less severe legal consequences because he surrendered the tablet and continued cooperating. That did not erase his role. He had provided the key, reviewed the family timeline, signed the statement, and locked the door while Caleb stood outside. He completed the requirements imposed on him and asked Naomi several times whether that meant he could see his grandson again. My answer remained the same. Compliance with a legal agreement was not the same as becoming trustworthy. I did not promise Paul that he would never see Caleb again. I also refused to promise that he would. The decision would depend on Caleb's needs, professional guidance, and whether Paul ever learned to tell the truth before silence became dangerous to him. The house became quieter after I cut contact with my family. At first, that quiet felt less like peace and more like empty space. There were no calls from my mother asking where Caleb was. No sudden offers from Brooke to collect him. No messages from Paul pretending not to understand why everyone was upset. There was also no emergency backup. For years, I had told myself that depending on my parents was practical. They lived nearby, knew Caleb, and had once been reliable grandparents. Even after they began ignoring my rules, I kept believing another firm conversation would correct the problem. It did not. A boundary without consequences had only taught them that I would complain and eventually continue as before. I rebuilt our schedule slowly. Caleb stayed in the after-school program he had started shortly before the storm. I added 2 approved caregivers instead of relying on one family household. I exchanged numbers with parents from his class and joined a pickup group for weather emergencies. At work, I stopped accepting every late meeting simply because I was the person most capable of handling it. My supervisor allowed me to work from home on 2 afternoons each week. When a project director tried to move a meeting past my agreed hours, I said no without giving him the history of my family as justification. I did not leave my career. I did not become a perfect mother who was present for every minute of every day. There were evenings when traffic made me late. There were mornings when Caleb wore mismatched socks because neither of us noticed. I once sent him to school with his lunch still sitting beside the refrigerator and had to pay for the cafeteria meal. The difference was that he always knew who would collect him. He did not have to guess whether Brooke had changed the plan, whether Nancy was hiding where he had gone, or whether telling me the truth would ruin a surprise. The financial recovery took time too. The urgent care copay had been manageable, but the deductible, Naomi's retainer, and the cost of preserving the electronic evidence had taken a large portion of the emergency fund I built after Daniel died. I postponed the kitchen renovation and tracked each expense until the savings began growing again. I was not rescued by a settlement, an inheritance, or a sudden promotion. I simply kept working. That was enough. I also had to admit where I had been wrong. I had underestimated Brooke because I thought obsession would look obvious. I believed she was impulsive, jealous, and occasionally inappropriate, but not disciplined enough to build a long plan. I had relied too heavily on people who treated access to Caleb as authority over him. I kept giving my parents small chances, because acknowledging the full pattern would have forced me to build a harder life without them. Those were my mistakes. They were not permission for what my family chose to do. Learning from my failures did not require accepting blame for their deception. Joanne remained part of our lives, but she did not become a replacement grandmother in a sentimental rush. She was still my quiet neighbor. Sometimes we drank coffee on her porch. Occasionally she received a package when I was working late. She never entered our home without asking. She never treated one act of help as a permanent claim on us. One afternoon, I thanked her again for preserving the camera files. She shook her head. I did not create the truth, Lauren. I only moved it somewhere they could not erase it. That was exactly what she had done. The footage had not saved me by itself. It gave me the first solid fact. From there, I had to report what happened. Hire Naomi, protect Caleb's statements, collect records, and withstand the pressure to surrender him in exchange for family peace. Joanne gave me a tool. I used it. Caleb continued seeing the child specialist for several months. Some weeks he spoke about the storm. Other weeks he talked about school, Daniel, or the fear that adults might disappear when he made them angry. One evening we were arranging books in his room when he found the dinosaur encyclopedia Brooke had given him. He sat on the carpet with it across his knees. "Can I remember the fun things with Aunt Brooke even if I don't see her?" he asked. "Yes. Does that mean I forgive her?" "It does not have to mean anything except that some of the memories were good." He studied the dinosaur on the cover. "What if she loved me?" "I think she did." "Then why did she do bad things?" "Because loving someone does not automatically make every choice safe. Sometimes people turn love into wanting to own the person. They start believing their feelings, give them the right to decide everything. Can someone love you and still not be safe?" "Yes." Caleb thought about that, then placed the book back on the shelf. I did not need him to hate Brooke. Protecting him did not require poisoning every happy memory he had with her. It required making sure she could not use those memories to reach him again. Last week, light snow began falling while Caleb and I walked home from Joanne's house. The storm drains were still visible, and the wind was gentle enough that the flakes settled on his hat instead of striking his face. He wore both red gloves. For months, they had lived in his drawer as an ordinary pair again. One no longer belonged to the porch, and the other no longer belonged to the box Brooke had prepared for a different life. Caleb bent down, gathered loose snow, and threw a small ball that landed several feet from my boots. "You missed," I said. "I was warning you. Should I be afraid?" "Probably." He made another one while laughing. We continued down the sidewalk, leaving 2 lines of footprints beside each other. No one was collecting him without telling me. No one was preparing another bedroom, another school, or another version of his life behind my back. When we reached our driveway, Caleb slipped his red-gloved hand into mine. Brooke had wanted my son because he already loved her. I finally understood that real love is not proven by how tightly you can hold someone. It is proven by whether they are still safe when they choose someone else. Caleb and I walked toward our front door together, and this time, no one was waiting behind us with a key. What this story teaches you is that love does not excuse control, secrecy, or manipulation. When someone ignores your rules, speaks for your child, or uses guilt to gain access, you should not dismiss it as harmless family behavior. Set boundaries, document repeated violations, and make sure those boundaries have consequences. You should also build more than one source of support, because depending completely on relatives can leave you vulnerable when trust breaks down. If a child shares something troubling, listen without pressuring them for details. Reassure them that they are not responsible, and seek help from qualified professionals. Do not exaggerate, retaliate publicly, or turn the child's pain into evidence for an audience. Preserve messages, records, and original files, then let the proper authorities evaluate them. You may have made mistakes, worked too much, or trusted the wrong people, but those weaknesses do not make you responsible for another person's deception. Being strong does not mean absorbing harm to keep a family together. Sometimes the wisest decision is to end access, rebuild your support system, and protect your child without demanding that they hate the people who hurt them. A healthy family respects boundaries before consequences force them to.